It should be. It says preparing. Oh, it is live. Great. I am so glad. All right. So, welcome to Authors Alcove for Fantasy Writers. This is a podcast where we explore the art of fantasy world building, marketing, and publishing. So, if you're a writer, or a fantasy lover, or just fascinated by stories, you're in the right place. I am your host, Agnes Wolf, and today we have Jennifer Marchman, author of the Mender Trilogy. She writes fantasy that weaves time travel. This is the first book, The Mender. This series, it's a blend of historical fiction, time travel, and alternative timelines, weaving together real historical accuracy with mind-bending metaphysical twists. So welcome, Jennifer. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I know I had asked you this before. I was going to ask you if you were a Doctor Who fan, which you said that you haven't really watched it. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, but you are an Outlander fan, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that what inspired you to write about this, or what was it that actually inspired you to write time travel?
I think I've always liked time travel. I mean, before Outlander, there were, like the choose your own adventure stories that would go back in time or, just any kind of time travel storyline I always enjoyed reading. And I love reading historical fiction. The more accurate, the better. Anything that makes me feel immersed in the time period is what I really love. And I've always wanted to write a book, even as a kid. I think Outlander was I would say Outlander is probably like my favorite book. I don't often reread books, but I've reread that one a couple times. So.
So historical accuracy is very important in your books. And so how did you do your research, and how did you make sure that you were staying accurate yet still going back in time with the different time streams?
Yeah, so it's set in Texas, and I'm a native Texan. So we had Texas history a couple of times in school, and I also homeschooled my kids. So we did Texas history together.
I'm a homeschool mom too.
Okay, yeah. So I feel like I learned Texas history a lot better when I had to teach it to my kids, and so there was a lot I just kind of knew from visiting museums, and we had a lot of Texas history books. And during COVID, my daughter and I went down to Goliad, where the Goliad massacre takes place, and the Presidio, and we took a tour, and I learned about the Angel of Goliad there. And I just kind of thought, wow, I'd love to write a book about her. And she's my youngest was when it was my seventh grader at the time. She's now a senior in high school, but I knew that I kind of wanted to. My kids were getting older, and I was ready to write a book, and so I was kind of starting to think about what I wanted to write. And yeah, so anyway, I just started writing, and then as I had questions, that's when I would go do more historical research and just kind of research that question. And then, sometimes I would come across other little rabbit holes I would go down, and little tidbits that I could add in. I'd be like, oh, wow, that's a cool fact I didn't know about. And I would add that in. And when it came to the Comanche stuff, so my main male character is he was taken captive as a boy. He's Anglo, and then raised by the Comanche, and then he's forced back into Anglo society as an adult. And so I needed to include some Comanche culture, but not being Comanche myself, I needed to really research that. And my very first beta reader is a Comanche tribal member. And she's actually the great granddaughter of Quanah Parker and his chief wife, Wakia, Quanah Parker is a major historical character or person in Texas history. And, she read it, and she gave me like tons of notes back, and everything was wrong. And so I went, I went to the Comanche Museum in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I met with the cultural specialist there. And we went over all of my questions, and I actually had it correct because I was following the museum's perspective. And my sensitivity reader had a different perspective. And in order to resolve that, because here's this tribal member who has, legit heritage, genealogical links, and grew up with all this history and story. and she's not agreeing with the museum. So what do I do? And so the way I solved it was I had my male Comanche characters be the museum's perspective, and my female characters be my sensitivity reader's perspective. And so they're both correct in my book. And I felt like it added a lot of depth and just more humanity to my book because, you know, even in my own, like on my own street, you know, the families next door to me don't necessarily have the same family culture and
I love that. That was actually going to be one of the questions I had later down. I was going to ask you about because you had mentioned that there was that conflict. And I love the approach that you took because one of the things that I personally believe is there's no truth. Like I mean, there is a truth, but it's unknowable. Like there's no person who can say, "Oh, this is definitely the truth," because we all have our own perspectives. Like even like all of your kids, they were raised by different parents, even though they were all raised by you, because there's different personalities, there's different memories, there's different all of those things. And so I love that approach that you took because I know that you mentioned that when I was looking through your book, it's by Eva, and who is the other main character?
yeah,
Yeah. So which one did you say is from the Comanche perspective?
Jim.
Okay. And
Well,
then,
so there are other Comanche characters who, um,
but the point of view character
yeah, the
is,
point of view character is Jim, and he's technically white.
but
Um,
you took that from your sensitivity reader's perspective, correct?
well, so Jim has more of the museum's perspective, and
Okay.
then so his adoptive brother is really the museum's perspective, and his adoptive brother has two wives, and those two wives have my sensitivity reader's perspective.
Okay. I really like that you did that because I think that makes it more true to life, like brings it closer to the truth. So, what are some common mistakes that you have seen in other people who have actually, I'm going to back up because I want to go back to that same topic that we were just talking about. So, having it from different perspectives, um, what were some of the things that you found challenging switching back and forth between those two different perspectives?
Hmm. Really sure. I don't recall having any difficulties. I tried to alternate. One chapter would be Eva, and then the next chapter was Jim. And so once I
But
was in that, uh, once I was in that character, I felt really. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
oh no, you're good. I was just wondering like about the head hopping. Like, was that difficult to not, as you're writing from one perspective and then switching to a different, or what were you pretty good? Like once you got into that character and you stayed in that as long as you were writing from their point of view.
Yeah, each chapter was either Jim or it was Eva, and that made it really easy to as I read through the chapter, go okay, oops, that's head hopping, or yeah, it always stayed in that perspective.
What, as far as time travel, what are some things that you found difficult um, or that you found easy as far as time travel mechanics? Because I know there are a lot of common mistakes that people do, and I'm curious what your experience with that was.
My solve for that is that we live in a multiverse, and I actually kind of think that that's probably the way reality is that every possibility exists somewhere in infinity, and and that is really what plays into the alternate timelines and what Eva's the cult that she is taken captive basically by a cult when she's a child and raised, and so she has a set of beliefs on what reality is, and the whole trilogy is really about her journey of um, discovering how narrow her view was, and then having to kind of come to terms with the things that she did in service of her beliefs.
Okay, so another thing I found very interesting is that you actually spent some time doing horse archery. You said for about 3 years, was it?
Yeah.
Well, what inspired you to include that in your book?
Well, I mean, he's my main character. Jim is raised by Comanche, and they're considered as good of horse warriors as the Mongols were. Like they were the lord. They're called the lords of the southern plains, and so that's just part of Comanche culture, and it's just it just happened to be something that I had kind of in my a little tiny little bit of experience with. So it was fun to write some scenes like that. And
So
to kind of, I still have connections in the horse archery world, and I'd email them and be like, how many arrows do you think a top archer could get off in, in before, like if you shoot an arrow straight up in the air, how many could you get off before it landed? And so it's fun to think through those like technical issues. And when I went to the museum, the cultural specialist, his father and his grandfather were renowned bow makers, and he's trying to bring archery back into the community. And so he had brought out his bow and some bows from the museum and arrows, and I had taken my bow, and we compared like different draw styles, and that was a lot of fun. So it was like we kind of geeked out on archery for a bit, and then we got down to my questions. But yeah.
do you think that if you were to shoot an arrow from a horse now that you could get a good target, good aim, or do you think that you need more practice?
I think, well, so I still shoot, but from the ground. Not as often as I did, but it's the riding is the easy part. And I hadn't really ridden before. So the way I even ended up knowing about this activity was while we were homeschooling. On our homeschool list, there was a little farm outside of town that they advertised horse archery lessons. And the teacher has been a horse archer for a really long time and competed in South Korea. And I was like, oh, we're definitely doing this. And I just signed up my kids without even asking them. And so all three of them were doing it for a little bit. And then my oldest was like, okay, this is not my thing. And so I asked the teacher, I was like, can I do this? And so much of homeschooling ended up being me living vicariously through my kids. And so he was like, yeah, sure. And then eventually my other two kind of dropped off. They were less interested, but they had fun at first. And so then it was just me doing it. And so, yeah, I just kind of fell into this hobby. But not having my own horse and living in the city, once my friend moved away, he took his horse with him. And so that was the end of horse archery. But I'd still be doing it if he still lived around here.
So from beginning of idea to your finished product, how long did it take you to get to the publishing?
So
The
it
first,
was, yeah, February of 2021, we had this gigantic ice storm in Texas, and everything shut down. And during that time, I just kind of started journaling. Once the power came back on, I started writing, and it took me 6 weeks to write the entire trilogy. And I do not recommend this method. It was like a mystical experience almost. I stopped eating, I stopped drinking, I stopped sleeping. Like my husband would be like, "You have to come to bed, you have to come make dinner." But once I was in, it was like I was tuned into a radio channel, and it was flowing through me. And I would get to a stopping place and go to bed and like just kind of half dream the next scene, get up in the morning and write it out. But after the first draft was done, it took me about 18 months to go through the beta process and editing and revising and all of that. And through the beta process, I added a new chapter 2, and then I extended the ending. But nothing was really, all the places were here, this is confusing, or you need more information here. So it was a lot of adding to and expanding, but I never needed to cut anything. It just kind of was in the exact, like I knew where I wanted to go when I started writing. I knew how I wanted it to end and some key points. And then, I just hit all of those.
the one thing that I read that you actually prefer the beta readers over critique groups. Is there a
Oh
reason?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, and this is it. I still have some PTSD from college, I think, and being in creative writing classes, and there's just so many egos that go into it. And I think it takes a really, really mature author to be able to read someone else's work and not turn it into their own voice. And I don't know that I can beta read well for somebody else. And actually, I was just beta reading for somebody recently, and I was like making lots of notes. And even on the third or fourth chapter, I was like, I'm not sure that I'm doing you service here because I think I'm trying to turn this into my book. So I really prefer people who read a lot and who know how to think. And I feel like beta readers are much better because they can go, this didn't make sense. You've got a plot hole healer. I remember you mentioned she had green eyes back here and now she's got blue eyes. What happened? Or, it was morning at the beginning of the chapter. And now suddenly it's the next day. So that when I feel like critique groups can end up being really emotionally fraught. Whereas if you're sending it to beta readers and they send you, they'll send you their unvarnished opinions on things, but since they're not also writers, I feel like it takes some layer of emotion out of it. And then when I would get comments back, I would read them. I'd be like, I'd take a deep breath. I'd be like, I'd put it away and I'd sleep on it. And the next morning I'd be like, oh, okay, I know how to fix these things. And it becomes then actionable items you can fix rather than in a lot of critique groups, it just feels like, I don't like this. So.
What's interesting is like I haven't thought about which I prefer. I know I tend to, okay, so I am a very laid back, laissez-faire type person. Like, so when I'm reading somebody else's work, I don't necessarily read it like a writer. And so I do a lot of beta reading. And sometimes I'm like, do they want more of like, this is what's good writing. This is, but normally I'm reading it as a reader. And that was something that I also noticed because I was doing a book club last year, Meet the Author Book Club, and they were all authors. And I noticed that that they all were thinking more analytical and critical. And I'm like, that's not the type of beta reader I am. I realize that I read books as a reader, not as a writer. And I
That's
think maybe
great.
that's the difference there. But
Yeah.
I do know that I had a friend who is a writer, like do a little critique of mine. And I'm not talking about like I was having her do it more like a beta reading. And I was like, I don't agree with you. Like she was like, this is good writing. Um, so if you want it to be good writing, you need to do this, that, and the other thing. And I was just like, but I don't agree with you. Like that was what I was running into. And I think there was more of that like critique group type partnership there rather than the beta reading. And I think maybe what I'm saying is I think I resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't like the label good, bad writing. Like that just is totally irrelevant. It's inactionable. Like you can't fix anything that's good or bad. You can fix, oh, this was confusing. You need more information here, or here's some grammar mistakes here. Like that's fixable. And I feel like anybody can improve their writing. Like we're always improving our writing. So yeah, I like beta readers better. Well, and it's great. Like um, I mostly read nonfiction these days because I think I broke my brain a little bit writing my book. So I've taken a really long, I'm part of a book club and sometimes I read it's a fiction book club. Sometimes I read the book, sometimes I don't. But mostly it's nonfiction that I'm really reading voraciously. And I think it's just because it's so different from fiction.
So as an indie author, because you're an indie author, correct?
Correct.
What marketing strategies did you use that you felt worked best for you?
Facebook ads did the best right in the beginning. And for every dollar I was spending, I was making two. And that was great. Since all the AI has been introduced into the Facebook ads, my ads have not been doing as well. And right after Christmas, I turned them off and took a breather. And then my husband's going to be taking over the setting up and tracking the stats and stuff. And I'm still going to be making the creatives more. So we're about to step back into trying again. I felt like the newsletters, the book promos that you can pay for, I got a lot of sales they're freebies, right? And so people I think grab the freebies and then you make money if they read through. But so many people have this really big to be read pile, they may never get to your book. So I felt like that didn't really give me the exposure I wanted. And it didn't really, like, I felt like I spent a lot of money on book promos that didn't pay back. What else did I do? Yeah, it's really been Facebook ads. And then lately, I've really enjoyed doing book clubs. And so I've been reaching out to book clubs in our area to see if they, would like come meet the author and doing podcasts. But really, I'd say the number one thing is still Facebook ads.
So what do you include in your Facebook ads that garners attention? Because I've heard people go both ways. Some people are like, oh, Facebook ads are great. And some people are like, not. What do you think makes yours so that way they're noticed?
I've started adding a little text animation to mine, and I've been using AI to generate images. And so I really try to pick something that where the person is looking at the viewer, so the figure in the image, and something that has a lot of emotion in it. And then the text, I'll use a little animation that it makes you, it catches your eye as you're scrolling through because the letters are moving. But it has to be really short, like to 2.5 seconds or less. So it just pops out. And then I had been writing my own copy, but just this last batch of ads, when we restarted, I let AI, ChatGPT, write my ad. Like I asked ChatGPT what were the themes of my book, and it gave me this really long list. And then I said, "Could you make a Facebook ad for this?" And it did. I read through. I was like, "That's not bad." And so I made some tweaks. I was like, "Let's see what this does." And so I'm still in the testing process with that, but that's kind of where I'm at. It's like having an emotional image with, my female character who's like making eye contact with the viewer, and the text is kind of a little bit animated, and then just trying out some AI generated text because it was pretty like short and punchy. And what else? Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's a
Yeah.
question I've been meaning to ask people is like, what do you think has actually worked? And I am becoming more of a fan of AI for like that type of stuff. But I feel awful saying that as a writer because people then are like, oh no, you know what, people have this big fear of AI, especially in the writing world. But I find it's been really great as far as helping me market and even helping me like even brainstorm of how can I reach more people. And so like I'm glad to hear how you're able to use AI in a way that doesn't feel like you are taking away from the creative process, but still
Yeah.
using it to help
Yeah.
us reach more
Well,
people.
well, and I've tried to think through. I would never pay someone to make images for my ads because I can't afford that. So it's like I'm not taking money away from an artist. Here's this tool that I can now have images because I couldn't afford to pay, the to pay an artist to constantly make me tons and tons, like tons and tons of images for ads. But I'm never going to go make my own book cover. And actually, I don't think I could. Like, I don't, when I see a professional who makes a book cover, it looks good. When I've, played around with it for a freebie, yeah, then it hasn't looked good. So it's like I will still pay, a book cover artist to make my cover. But yeah, I think finding where AI is actually a help and not, yeah, stealing the creative process, is a good thing.
So this is kind of a question I ask everybody. It's one of the last questions I usually ask everybody. But if you could go back to the beginning of your publishing journey, what advice would you give to yourself that might have helped you?
Don't spend money on book promos. Um,
Maybe even not just the publishing process, but like even the writing process. Is there something that you wish you would have known before you had started the journey?
that is a hard question to answer. I loved the entire process because it felt like an unfolding. It wasn't, I almost didn't go into it with any expectations or particular goals. And maybe that would be my advice would be, I feel like I did it the right way for me. I asked myself, what is success for me? I don't care about money. I don't particularly care about awards. Um, I don't care about fame, really. I just wanted to write a book and put it out in the world, and I wanted some people to read it. So I felt like just getting the book out there was a huge accomplishment. And yeah, and that's what I help co-host a self-publishing support group. And that's what I'll ask people. I'll be like, what's your definition of success? And because one friend of mine was having trouble querying. And I did like 20 queries before I was like, I don't want an agent. And it wasn't, I know, and I have other people who's like, you need to do at least 80. So it's like, I didn't feel right as I was writing even the first query. It's like, that wasn't my path. And so this friend, I was like, what's your definition of success? And she's like, I want to see my book in the airport. I was like, okay, that's clear. You need an agent. You need to be traditionally published. So like, I think that's my advice. It's just thinking through what's your definition of success, and then that kind of helps you choose what path. And then I just really enjoyed the whole unfolding process of writing the book, and then as I came to problems, researching what the next step would be. And yeah, and maybe the other thing I would tell myself is launching is not an emergency. Like, it's an arbitrary deadline, and if you miss it, deadlines can slide. They're helpful to like actually get it done. But I think towards the end, it felt like, oh, I've got to get all these ducks in a row, and they all got to go out at this certain time. And that was super stressful. And it's,
I really like that you have to ask yourself, what do you consider success? I think that is huge advice. And I just wanted to show your book one more time. This is the full trilogy. So you had finished the whole trilogy in 6 weeks. How did you decide to release them? That's a question I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it did. I thought it was one book, but then I realized it had way too many words to be one book. But I also realized I had 3 distinct arcs and then one overarching arc. And a mentor of mine who's a big indie author in Austin, she recommended launching them a month apart. But that's a piece of advice I would not do again. I would launch them all at the same time. And it was because people want to know that the trilogy is actually, or the series is actually going to be complete before they pick out the first book, because they don't want to get attached and then the author bail on them. And so I had a lot of people who got really excited about my book, and they would even leave comments on the ad of being like, I'm going to wait until they're all 3 out before I, get it. And so if I could do it again, I ended up releasing book 2 and 3 in the second month rather than waiting, because I felt like all the money I put into Facebook ads was just a waste. I should have released all 3 at the same time. And then there's, you can get read through, and you just advertise book 1. You don't need to advertise book 2 and 3, because you're looking for, unless you've got a series that you can dive in anywhere, if mine is a traditional trilogy where you need to start at book 1.
And for our listeners, this is currently on authorsalcove.org as a giveaway. You can win all 3 books, and definitely worth reading. I love that. So I'm going to ask one more question just because we have plenty of time. So how did you find your cover artist? Because one thing I really noticed, like, I'm going to show these. It's all very similar. The only thing that's different is the background. Where did you find your cover artist?
So I was on, I think, a historical fiction Facebook group for authors, and someone posted their new book cover, and I just I stopped scrolling. I was like, that is a gorgeous cover. Who's your artist? And so I didn't really shop around. He's out in England. He's a British artist, and so he made a mock-up, and I loved the very first thing he did. And actually, it was a much more photorealistic, kind of a gray tone cover. And when I decided to split it into a trilogy, I asked him what my options were, because I couldn't afford to do 2 more covers. And so he's like, we could just change the colors on these, so then it looks like it's all part of the same thing. And so I felt like that was a good budget choice for cohesiveness, and yeah, but I love my cover.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And I love like just the subtle differences. Like this one shows kind of a cabin, and then this one has like the tribal in the background. And then I don't know, what is this one? What is this background?
Yeah, that's the Presidio. That's where the Goliad massacre took place.
Yeah, I like just the subtle differences. But yes, I because I actually looked at it because I thought it was a very beautiful cover. For me, I'm not doing historical fiction, but it says Oliver Bennett of More Visual Limited, because
Yeah.
I did whenever I see a artwork that I think looks very professionally done, especially for an indie author, I always have to look. Okay, so who is the cover artist?
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you being on here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I love hearing your insights of your fantasy world building. This would be technically sci-fi, correct?
I speculative fiction, I think, is where people kind of put it. I'd say it's like 80% historical fiction with a time travel twist.
Okay. Well, if you're intrigued as I was by Jennifer's work, definitely check out the Mender Trilogy. You can go to her website. Your website is your name, I believe.
Yep, jennifermarchman.com.
Yep.
Yep.
Or you can go to our spring book giveaway, which is authorsalcove.org. You'll see this one amongst a couple others that are out there that I have posted for our spring book giveaway. Also, I just want to thank my listeners. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and leave a review. Um, it really helps keep this podcast going and helps me helps listeners find my podcast and figure it's a podcast worth listening to. I love that I was like butchering my ending, but that is okay. Anyway, thank you guys